Joining us on the line right now, Walter Williams, syndicated columnist, professor of economics at George Mason University. We thought we'd have him on today to talk about the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. How are you doing today, Walter?
Oh, good morning. Good morning.
It's a pleasure to have you. Okay, I want to start by sort of a question that we were bouncing around earlier on this program. You know, there's so many people today say, well, if Dr. King were alive today, he would feel thus and such about this and thus and such about that. Some of the things that have been sort of brought to his name has been ascribed to is, for example, global warming. He would be against global warming. He would be against the Redskins name. I mean, why do we do that? And are these accurate things to say based on what we know about Dr. King?
Well, I don't think so, but people will have to say something, to get some street credibility, I guess. But I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that the civil rights struggle that Martin Luther King was heavily involved in, the civil rights struggle in our country is over and it's won. And what I mean by that is that at one time black Americans did not have the constitutional guarantees of everybody else, but now we do, and it's over and won. Now, the very fact that we look at these problems that blacks face as civil rights problems is devastating. That is, just because civil rights struggle is over and won does not mean that they're not major problems that face a large percentage of black Americans, but they're not civil rights problems.
Well, like we hear a lot of talk about income inequality right now.
Well, if you have a system where black kids, the average black kid who manages to graduate from high school in the first place, he has the reading and writing and computational skills of an average white 7th or 8th grader. That is, the public schools, are giving blacks fraudulent education. Matter of fact, I've often pointed out, if I were the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan and I wanted to sabotage any hope for black academic excellence, I could not find a better means for doing so than the public school system in most of our cities.
Our guest is Walter Williams. He's the author of Race and Economics. And by the way, you can get all of his information, including his very good columns, at walterewilliams.com. Mr. Williams, we just touched on this income inequality thing, and that's you're hearing Martin Luther King Jr.'s names evoked today, not as a remembrance of the struggles won, as you put it, the fact that we actually we won the civil rights fights that he was at the forefront of back in the 60s, but they're using him now in this push for income inequality, in this push for the government to get involved in wages that people are getting paid. I want you to listen to a clip of a speech here from Dr. King back in 1967.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying to you this morning, my friend, even if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, go on out and sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Handel and Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote portraits. Sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well.
And this is the kind of stirring rhetoric that you would hear from Dr. King, but these days you don't really hear that from...
No, you don't.
Why? Talk to me about that. Why are we missing that part of the equation?
Well, I believe it's part of the propaganda that emerged during the 60s, 70s, and 80s that certain jobs are demeaning. Hamburger flipping jobs, they demean these jobs. But I'm 77 years old, so I grew up at a different time than today. But my stepfather used to tell me that any kind of job is better than begging and stealing. Well, that's not the way people look at things nowadays. That is, people think that certain jobs are beneath them, and matter of fact, that's entirely new in black history.
Well, and it's more than that, Walter Williams. I mean, listen, you're a professor of economics at George Mason University. You understand the reality of this. Today, if somebody is, as you put it, flipping burgers or sweeping streets, as Martin Luther King referred to it in '67, and they happen to be black, they're told by their quote-unquote political leaders that they're only doing that job because they're black, and they're being kept down by the white establishment.
Well, I think, matter of fact, I think that is awful. That is an awful message to convey to young black people. You know, and the employment situation reflects some of that. That is, in 1948, the unemployment rate among black teenagers was less than white teenagers. Matter of fact, blacks were more active in the labor market than anybody else in our country.
Wow.
Now, all that has changed. Matter of fact, I document that in thoroughly with a lot of citations in my book, in Chapter 3 of my book, Race and Economics.
Wow, that is remarkable. So, in 1948, black youth unemployment was actually lower than white.
Yes, as a matter of fact, it was 9.4. It was 9.2%, and white unemployment was 10.4%. And blacks were their labor force participation rate was 106% of that of whites' labor force participation rates.
Well, if you were in charge of the world,
which I'd be okay with, by the way.
I'd be totally okay with that. If you were the guy making all the decisions, and Martin Luther King Day came along, what would you have people remember about Dr. King?
Well, I think that Dr. King, he carried us a long way in terms of the vision of civil rights, and I think one of the things that's ignored, that's not paid enough attention, is that black Americans have made the greatest gains over the shortest period of time, over some of the highest hurdles than any racial group in the history of mankind. Now, for what I mean by that, well, if you add up the income, if you just thought of black Americans as a nation with our own GDP,
right,
we would be the 18th richest nation on the face of the earth.
Wow.
It's been black Americans are a few black Americans among the world's richest people. Black Americans are some of the world's greatest personality. It was a black American in the form of Colin Powell who headed the world's mightiest military. Now, the significance of this, in 1865, neither a slave nor a slave owner would have believed these kinds of gains would be possible in just a little bit over a century. And as such, it speaks to the intestinal fortitude of a people, but just as importantly, it speaks to a greatness of a nation in which these kind of gains would have been possible. These kind of gains would have been impossible anywhere on the face of this earth except the United States. But the question that remains for us now is how to get these gains to a large percentage of black Americans, close to 30%, for whom these gains appear to be elusive. And as long as we keep today's vision of that racial discrimination explains everything, then these gains will be elusive to this group of people forever.
Well, Walter Williams, we're told, though, today that Martin Luther King's dream won't be complete until we get a hold of carbon emissions to calm down global warming. I mean, that was the funniest one I saw. Do you have any insight into the Dr. King's views on global warming?
I don't even think they were talking about global warming.
I think it may have been global cooling.
They were talking about global cooling at the time.
Author of,
matter of fact, yeah, if anything, it would have been global cooling.
Author of Race and Economics and the Smartest Guy in the Room, whatever room he goes into. Find his stuff at walterewilliams.com.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.